Hey guys, John Delarose here, the leading Hispanic voice in science fiction. I wanted to get little better caught up on videos this week. Just try to do something where I can kind of show things. I'm trying to in my social media sabbatical keep a focus on the creative process, being creative, creating something. Rather than just kind of rehash the news, which obviously rehashing the news gets a lot of clicks and all that, but people are interested in the process. I get a lot of messages about this as well, and it actually is good timing because I'm just starting up a comic, which will be I'm planning on a 100-page comic. It's going to be a manga style that I've never written in manga style before, so we'll see how this goes. And it's I'm not going to announce the artist or collaborator at this point because it's a little too early on this, but we're working on that, and we're going to come out with a volume. It's going to be a 100-page volume of a comics are having trouble selling, and but this we're talking traditional comics and all that. So there's the Marvel and DC comic model, where you go into the comic store and you pick up Spider-Man and all that. That's not selling so much anymore because, there's only so much you can do with the same characters for 50, 70 years. And on top of that, they've kind of they put in like a intense political agenda with their writing, which has kind of turned off a lot of people. But there's actually a robust like Kickstarter comic sort of economy. I want to say it is. And you can build a reputation there and kind of and get yourself going. You get open or risky comics for adults. I tend to write PG-13 level because I don't really want to write porn or anything like that. It's just that doesn't really appeal to me. So I would say that adults generally enjoy reading my stuff, but teenagers and kids could mostly read it too. Just it depends on my books. So I'm working on one right now, and the high concept of it is going to be sort of like a magical world that revolves around the zodiac. And because I'm doing a manga style, I'm integrating like the high school girl concept where a girl is trying for her exams, doing her thing, wearing the little uniform and all that, because that's just a very popular trope in anime and manga, and I want to incorporate that just to keep with the themes of it. So I start there. I start with I want to have this girl in the high school. I want to have the magical world that is revolved around this sort of concept, and then that's how I start to break it down. So at that point, I start to drill into, well, what's the high concept? Okay, so I've got the concept. And I guess I can spoil some of this. It doesn't matter. So I build a summary of the concept, which is just 2 paragraphs, real quick, which I've got right here. Once every 2,000 years, the ages shift, right? And this is in reality too. So I think we're still in the age of Pisces, and we're switching into the age of Aquarius, or we already have. It just depends on the calendar. But this is typically how the zodiac sort of stuff works, and so. I'm putting this in that basically there's a celestial battle that's going to be happening, as these ages shift, and the battle is to reshape the world and all that, right? And from there, I go, okay, so this is my backdrop. There's this giant battle reshaping like all the worlds, like the celestial realms, the earth realms, and I got it from there. And remember, I started with my just high concept. I wanted to just do a zodiac thing, and I wanted to incorporate the sort of Japanese high school drama element of it, and then I progressed into this sort of more refined concept. At that point, I put a basic plot sort of that I'm going to do revolving around that, and I think without spoiling, because this is kind of like back of book cover type of information here. Without spoiling too much, this girl's going to get flung into this magical world, and she's going to end up fighting basically to preserve reality. Against forces that want to remake reality in their own image and become God, right? So it's kind of a classic thing, classic sort of man versus sort of supernatural, using your wits and using what you got in order to fight something that's immensely more powerful than you. But But the immensely more powerful, obviously, you're going to have the Ubris. This is what classic Star Trek episodes are sort of all based upon. If you look at what Kirk and Spock and all them fight, you have almost every single episode revolves around somebody trying to be God, and and then Kirk and Spock kind of coming in just as like men saying, you can't treat people like this. You can't just step on people because you have some extra power. And that's kind of the themes I want to evoke with this book. At that point, this sort of thought process can take a while. I'm trained pretty well to do it, so I can come up with things like this very fast. But that comes from years of doing it. So on your first steps, just kind of map this out. The more organized about this, the better it's going to be. The better you're going to be able to tie in your themes in your first draft. The better you're going to be able to tie in different, scenery and things like that are going to be compelling, and you'll have to do less work down the line if you do the prep work in advance. At that point, I develop my characters. So I talk about who they are, who they are. So the main character I've named her Sayori. I'm trying to stick with Japanese-ish names at this point. Sayori comes from a role-playing game I played several years ago where a friend of mine had her character named Sayori, and I just wanted to drop a little nod to her in that. So that's how I named my characters for the most part. So I've got my comments that she's a normal high school girl. She actually thinks horoscopes are dumb, and she's annoyed that her friends care about them to start. She's a sort of a hot-headed person that rushes into things. Very very typical, sort of fantasy shoujo sort of main character, but she has a heart of gold, right? That's the important part. She's got the heart of gold, and her heart's in the right place, and so she'll be doing that at that point. I've named some other characters I've kind of made up. We got the evil overlord, of course, who's trying to remake the world. I'd give a little description of what his motivations are and who he is. He's a guy who's been around for thousands of years, so he's got a different perspective than our high school girl, of course. And of course, I've got our side characters, which I give a little less description to along the way. And I usually do about a sentence or two for B characters. So just kind of so I get a vague impression of who they are, and I let them kind of present themselves later, so it's fresh when I'm writing. But for the main characters, I definitely do a couple paragraphs. Once I get into my plotting stage, I'll actually flesh that out more, and I'll actually go over their entire backgrounds, their family backgrounds, and just so I have an idea of who they are before I even set to writing. Now, once I've got that done, I actually start with the plot. I'm going to break this up because this is I'm intending on a 100-page book here. So I'm starting it out with the intro being 10 pages. I'm starting it out, and then part one is going to be, I'm going to break it into 3 acts after the intro. So 10-page intro, part 1, 30 pages, part 2, 30 pages, part 3, 30 pages. And I put myself a paragraph or 2 of each of those parts so that I kind of know what's going on and what direction I want to go. After that, because this is where comics kind of differentiates from writing. From writing, I would break it down into chapters in each of these parts and just have each scene kind of laid out with like a sentence of description before I get into the scene. But for comics, because I have to pace this perfectly over different pages, I actually have to break it down page by page. So I'm going to say, Sayori's walking with her high school friends talking about horoscopes and all that. This is going to be the first 3 pages. The next 2 pages is her fretting over her exams. The next 2 pages, something strange happens, and she's not sure what it is. And then she goes back to school the next day, and then the strange occurrence occurs again a second time, and it rips her out of this world and into the magical world, and that's going to be the last 3 pages. So that's how I'll break it down typically. That's not what I have. I haven't written that yet. That was just off the top of my head. So it might end up a little different than that when we come to this actual deal. But I'd continue down the parts, and actually I break down all of the pages before I even set script down. That way I know how the breakdowns are going to look. And so when I'm writing page 1 or 2, I can actually throw in some concepts from the end of the book, so that there's a little bit of foreshadowing going on when I do this. And that's important. So when you want to write something cohesive, kind of the difference between pros and not, and sort of amateurs, is you're leading towards a conclusion already, and you know what the conclusion is, and so you can go back and sprinkle some things in. Now, you can do this later, of course, so I'm breaking this down. You can write out the script and do this later, and then you can come back and then rewrite your early parts to match it. I find that's a lot more work, so I try to do as little rewriting as possible, and that way everything kind of stays fresh for me. And so that's why I do a lot of prep work up front to make sure I've got all my themes, all my little tricks that I want later in the book showing up in the first few pages here. It's especially important in something this long to have that kind of cohesive. Now, I haven't written the script for this, so I'm going to pull up a different script to kind of show you how I break it down from that point. So once I've got all that, once I've got all my outline done and all that, I've got, let's see, Flying Sparks. I've got my actual scripts done, and I'll pull up, what do I pull up? I don't care. I'll just pull up a script I'm working on right now. It's called The Negotiator. It's a different concept. This is kind of a space deal. I'll show you kind of my first page, what they look like on my script. So pretty simple. So I've already broken down my outline and all that. So I try to always set the stage with like an establishing shot. This is from Hollywood. So in movies, they kind of, you know how they pan in on like the whole city and all that. So you see where you're at, right? So I've got a barren planet that looks rocky, almost like an asteroid, a small military-looking ship orbiting it. So we've got the setting. We know what we're in for in terms of the planet. We know what we're in terms of a little ship, and some dialogue naming the planet, and then we go. Panel 2, inside the planet. It's internal mines where the insectoid creatures, and of course I clean this up for during edits and all that, live. We see this gal, Alia Rin, and she has an armor suit. She's lithe, pretty, Metroid-like suit. We can see through her visor for the feminine image, struggling against some silhouettes of insectoid aliens. It's a dark chamber. So that's panel 2. So I set the stage, and then I set the plot of what's going on, so we know what's going on for everybody right here. And that's how I like to begin things. That set the stage, go right into action. Set the stage, go right into action. That's the best way to really handle comics, in my opinion. It's a little different, but you want to captivate the reader on the first page, and that's why you want to go into that. So look at and notice how you go. Big shot of the exterior world. We're inside. We see the scene, and then we're slowly inching closer to the character, and this is how we start to attach to the character. So we got the setting, we figured it out, and then we attach to the character. Closer shot, we can see the silhouettes are monstrous-looking things. Hideous, the main enemy. 2 of the insectoids are pushing a struggling Alia down into a stretcher type thing with a skin-like surface to it. They're saying some garbled alien language to make them more alien. I've really pissed off the spheroid workers who inhabit this rock. This is the dialogue box, so this is her internal thoughts. So we get, and then close up on her wrists as they're bound to the top of the stretchers, and I'm all out of plans. So I'm doing, with this device, I'm actually doing the here's how we got here. This is where we're at right now, and then in a couple pages, we're going to shift backwards in time and go to where we got there. This is a standard kind of comic device for doing that. I don't do this all the time, but that's what would too much setup look like versus not enough? Interesting question. I think too much setup is sort of like a you see that when it's just slow to start. You can have I've seen books that have just 7 or 8 pages of introduction. It really depends on how long something is too. For a novel, your first, you don't want to layer too much introduction in. In modern times, the audience is in and out real quick. We are very ADD people as a society right now. So you have to kind of tailor it to your audience in some ways. You might have, back in the day, 1930s, 1940s, when you're coming out with Lord of the Rings or whatever, you can do this whole sprawling thing describing the backdrop and describing the hills and describing this and describing that for several chapters before you even get into things. But you can't get away with that so much anymore. That sort of setup, it's called info dumping in some sort, and that's the kind of I don't know. I try not to do that, and I try to sprinkle in the backdrop setting and what's going on over the course of things, because people like a mystery in some to hook them. In some sprinkle it in, you can also get some information like across as a mystery and make the information more interesting as it's going along. So I try to start an action as much as I possibly can. I think my Ember War comic that I'm working on right now has 3 pages of intro for a 22-page issue. So you definitely want it around 10% or less, I would say, before you got the call to action and moving out. And that's what I aim for. So hopefully that was useful. I apparently have somebody here and I have to go. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you guys soon. Hi.